Welcome to No Room for Phonies, where Charles looks really small and I look really tall.
That's if you watch the video version. This is episode 66.
And it's entitled Third Culture Kids, Growing Up as a Third Culture Kid. And we're doing it because you are a person who grew up as a third culture kid. You were an adult third culture kid.
Yes.
Which is an acronym.
ATCK.
Yes. Anyway, the green light moment, and this is from reading the book.
Mistakes were made, but not by me.
Self-justification and lack of accountability are actually the scourge of our current entitled society. How do you like that?
That's a
green
great
light moment
sentence. So, but green light, I thought that's when we're personally supposed to say,
yes,
we're not going to do this.
Well, I am personally not going to self-justify
and have lack of accountability
because I don't want to be part of what happens in an entitled society.
Ditto.
I would say read that book.
Oh, yeah. It's a game changer.
Life changer. And the last chapter is about Donald Trump. And it's just fascinating there. Yeah. So the book I'm recommending is actually the Third Culture Kids book, which I'm almost finished. The experience of growing up among worlds. There, I'm trying to get it so that there it is. And it's by David C. Pollock and Ruth E. Van Recken. Anyway, it's excellent. Like if you were ever considering doing that
taking your child
kids,
to another country for an extended period of time.
You need to actually read this book. So
it's very important.
Mm-hmm. And then my podcast recommendation is Kate Bowler and Father Richard Rohr, How Great Love and Suffering Can Move Us into a New Stage of Life, Making Room for the Mystery of Joy and Suffering, When to Hold On and When to Let Go. And then we're also listening to...
they need to let go of such long titles.
No, I think I added to it. I think it was just the title was When to Hold On and When to Let Go. But anyway, and we are actually listening to Father Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward. But he has tons of books. And Rohr is how you spell his last name.
Yep.
So definitely worth looking at his stuff.
Yeah,
he's quite brilliant. Okay, so Third Culture Kid. So I'm going to ask you questions.
Citizens of everywhere and nowhere
is what this book talks about with third culture kids. And I actually wrote down quite a few quotes about things when I was reading. There's an organization called Global Nomads International, which I thought was interesting.
Support group kind of?
Yeah, kind of a support group because... Anyway.
And the book covers children of diplomats, children of missionaries, or expats working in whatever industry, or military families that move around. And it doesn't even have to be from different countries. You can move around within the country.
Yeah, they talk about that as well.
But I mean, I know in the US, a lot of them go to Germany or Korea or whatever.
Yeah. So anyway, my first thing is that I think you should tell a little bit of your story. Like, where did you live and for how long did you live there?
So my parents were Canadian born, but worked in Colombia, South America, and I was born there. And I lived there for 16 out of 18 years. So I was there until kindergarten started. We came to Canada because my parents' employers pulled them out of the country and said to go back to Canada. Fortunately, we were here when my brother's cancer was discovered and they were able to treat him and he survived. And then a year and a half later, the employer called my parents back and said, would you like to go back? And so we did. So then from grade 2 to graduating from high school, I lived in Colombia with 2 other visits to Canada in summer.
Like furloughs.
Yeah, summertime furloughs. So
Like where? Just say.
Where did I live? Okay, so I lived in 2 different cities. Cali. I was born in Cali, Colombia, and lived there too for a couple of years. And then the rest of the time I lived in Medellin, Colombia.
So how do you think, I was just actually reading the chapter
schooling
on education, and how do you feel that impacted your schooling? Just because.
Well, I did kindergarten, grade 1 in Manitoba. Then I did grade 2 in Cali, and I was in a bilingual school. And I had oral Spanish, but I had to learn written Spanish. And I just learned how to read and write in grade 1 in Canada. So then I was thrown into learning Spanish in grade 2. And the oral Spanish came back really quickly because kids learn oral Spanish quickly. But the writing part and the reading, I struggled a bit with that. And was bullied. So my best friend was actually a Japanese expat kid.
Yeah, they talk about that in the book.
So he and I kind of defended ourselves against the Colombian kids in the class.
Because you you don't look like.
Well, in Colombia there is a range of skin colors from fair and blue-eyed all the way to very dark and like full black. Because of the slave trade there from 300 to 200 years earlier. And then there's a lot of Moorish or Arabic and Jewish blood in the Spanish line. And then there's indigenous genetics in there, mixed in there too. So there's quite a range of colors. Skin color wise, with brown hair and brown eyes, I didn't stick out too terribly much, but my accent at first, until my Spanish became fluent, in grade 2 it stuck out.
Yeah. So
because I had lost Spanish while I was in Canada.
So in elementary school, basically you went to a Spanish
just for grade 2.
Oh.
And then we moved cities to Medellin, and then I went to a school missionary kids school, and it was all American teachers. And I don't know which state the curriculum was from. The teachers were from all over different parts of the states. And I lived with my parents, and in carpools there wasn't a school bus. The parents carpooled and took the kids to school. They took turns. And so I was there for grades 3, 4, 5, and 6 with American curriculum.
And all missionary kids.
And all missionary kids. And
it must have been small classes, though.
Yes, and multi-levels.
Yeah,
Grade 3 was a grade 1, 2, 3 split. Mm-hmm. Grades 4, 5, 6 was another split. And then grade 7, 8 was another split. So I always had other grades and other things going on in the multi-level classroom. I refused to pledge allegiance to the flag or sing.
They talk about that actually in the book. It's so funny.
I said, well, I'm either Colombian or Canadian. I'm not American, so figure something else out. My dad stood by me, so they didn't get a Canadian flag, and they didn't even have a Colombian flag in the assemblies.
Wow.
Yeah,
they were in the country of Colombia.
Yeah, but it was USA all the way.
Wow.
So
that's crazy, really, when you think of it.
And so they found some pledge to the Canadian flag written by some Boy Scout organization, not the official Boy Scouts. It was some other one, Youth Crusaders or something. Anyway, I had to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the Canadian flag at the same time. The Americans were saying it to the American flag because I was not allowed to sit down. And that was considered disrespectful. And I couldn't I think they should have just let me just stand there.
Be quiet.
Yeah, quietly.
Yeah, you didn't have to say it. Anyway, sorry. I digress. We're going to be here all night, which is fine.
You can keep me back on
That's
track.
Okay. So then you went to high school.
And then I switched for middle school and high school, I switched to a Canadian-run school run by Canadian teachers. And the Alberta curriculum was the one implemented. So there was no grade 13. So I did grade 7 through 12.
And then that's when you came back.
And then I graduated from grade 12 and came to Canada.
But
so then I had Canadian curriculum with Canadian history, geography, all the rest of it. But because we had so many American kids in the school, the teachers had to be inclusive. So they did actually quite a bit of North American.
But I think your impact, though, was when you went to apply to university.
When I went to apply to university, it was very challenging.
Limited, right?
Because just in case, I took an SAT test in case that helped. I wasn't ever going to go to the States, but my brother ended up did. So I took an SAT test just in case, and then.
But you said you were like walking
my average was.
You were walking around a room and you wanted to do art, but you didn't have.
That was the big So I wanted for undergraduate degree. I wanted to do graphic design and marketing, and at the time there wasn't digital registration that you went to the gym and looked at the tables and chose your major and went up to the department head and applied. So I had applied to get into the university, which I had been accepted, but I hadn't declared my major or program. So then I walked up to the marketing graphic designs and they said, "Where's your portfolio?" And portfolio in Spanish means briefcase. So I held up my briefcase and I said, "Here it is." And they said, "Well, open it and show us your artwork." And I looked at my dad and he explained to me that I misunderstood what portfolio meant. And then I had to say all my artwork stayed in Colombia. So I had nothing from 5 years of high school.
They talk about all this, like in how, and then the last chapters that I'm reading now are actually how parents can make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah. That they can actually plan for their kids. So anyway,
I completely took a different direction in university, which has been fine in the end, but it was very disappointing not to be able to do graphic design and marketing.
Yeah. Positive and negative aspects of friendship for you based on your experiences.
Well, when I was in Colombia, I had lots of good Colombian friends, and at my school, I had both Canadian and American friends. But when I came back to Canada, I had a hard time making deep friendships. Everything seemed superficial. The boys or young men in university seemed very immature and stupid.
Mm-hmm. That they actually
the young women in university were fine, but I ended up most of my peer group. Even though I was in first year, I ended up being friends with people that had put university off for a year or two. Plus they had grade 13, so they were just that much older. But all my friends were 2 or 3 years older than me in
But
university.
I think because of and you didn't move around, you moved around.
I lived in 22 different houses before I came to Canada. No. That's including being in Canada. I think I lived in about 12 different houses living.
But they talk about this, that you have to learn to do things like deep and fast.
Yes. You make friendships very deep and fast, and you want to be open. And being Latin American as well, you do wear your heart on your sleeve and you form steadfast and long lasting and loyal friendships in Latin American countries. And Canadians don't do it the same way.
And they talk about something called confessional impulse, where you just...
which I still... spill it all out, even when it's not really appropriate. So that happened a couple times when I first came to Canada, rather embarrassingly.
Yeah. So then there's the whole idea of leaving,
Oh, well, you know me, leaving. Whenever we've moved a house, or we've left even a holiday cottage, I have to have a little goodbye moment.
Yes.
Right. I kind of have to go and think and say goodbye. Yeah,
they talk about that a lot, actually, about unresolved grief.
Yes.
Around leaving and
So when I was 17 and we, just before my 18th birthday, we left Colombia. And we were with some Colombian friends who wanted to go to Disney World. So we flew to Florida, and then we met some other classmates of mine who were going up to Ohio. So we all got on this bus, and it was a school bus with bunks. My dad found this cheap thing. I don't know. Anyway,
of course he did.
we all rode from Florida to Ohio on this bus, and then from Ohio to Niagara. But I thought, oh, it's an adventure, right? Because and I knew I was leaving Colombia for a long time. It felt like it might be for good, but I mean, I was planning on going back after my university graduation or something like that.
Right.
So I was going to be away for 4 years, but the shock of it actually being very, very real didn't hit me till Disneyland was over, and then I was on the stupid bus. And then we crossed into the Canadian border, and I was just a mess.
Well, because there's they
I realized I wasn't going to see
denial, anger, depression, withdrawal, rebellion, this vicarious grief, and then delayed grief.
Yep.
So that,
and I had been, being the youngest of 4, I had seen my brother's rebellious mistakes and stupidity in their teenagers. So
but that all had to do
I had been
with,
I had been a goody two shoes, and then I rebelled.
But all those feelings are because you were denied, that your parents didn't actually allow you a mourning period.
No. It was suck it up, get going. And then I had to get my summer job, my first summer in Canada, and it was awful. For me.
Yeah.
I mean, it was probably fine, but
no.
Emotionally, it was awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was funny. I worked as a landscaping company out doing the tree trimming, and I worked with a crew of foreign workers, and mostly Jamaicans, and 2 Canadian guys. And it was great. I just totally, I wasn't Jamaican. I didn't know anything about the Jamaican culture, but I just got along with them.
Yeah, because
And the foreman kind of took me under, a Jamaican foreman, took me under his wing. And it was just, but I was fine, but not with the Canadian guys. I didn't want to hang out with them.
But I would say that of the things, you probably were more depressed and withdrawn.
Yes.
I mean, you did get drawn into, because you were in a church culture.
Yes, I
you
had
got
some
drawn into it.
My depression hit after second year of university. It took a while.
Yeah. Well, that's the denying grief delays everything, right? So if you don't actually, because mourning is actually the conscious acknowledgement of loss. And then you find ways and rituals that help you recognize and mourn it. And you have to have that, or else it's difficult to move on. And then in my third year, I started studying how to teach English as a second language and linguistics. And I had a professor who was also not Canadian born, and he helped me, and I did research on Canadian culture versus Colombian culture. And that's when my eyes were open to what I'd been going through for 2 years or 3 years. Right. Because it's actually
I resolved
it's actually super, 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 super normal. We were just talking.
When I was going through it, I thought I was very abnormal.
Right. But we were actually talking about most third culture kids have something that they wear all the time from their culture.
Here it is, my silver cross. So in Colombia, at 15 years old, the girls have a big 15-year-old coming out party with dances and dresses and whatever. Quinceañeras, yeah. And the boys usually don't have a party. They might have a dinner, but they get some gift that has value or sentiment to them. So I wanted, so this is Colombian silver, and from one of the mines there, and I wanted something.
Yeah.
So that's my
but
thing.
it's interesting that all these things are actually in this book.
Well,
and
in our house, over the years, I've slowly gotten rid of things that don't mean anything, but we still have some Colombian things.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not a hoarder, but I have a hard time letting go of them.
Yeah, no, we have still things that we have. What do you feel are the top 3 to 5 traits of third culture kids that you would say are the most?
A lot of us have wanderlust. I'm not one of them, but a lot of us have the desire to always travel. A lot end up going back to their host country in their young adult years or adult years?
Well, they tell the story. Yeah, they tell the story of this one young woman who went back, but then she discovered that because she was no longer like an expat, she couldn't work. She couldn't afford to live in a safe area.
Yeah.
Like there was just a lot of things that she
and then you go
think.
back to you go back to the, what is it? What host country is the one where you're not from, that you live in? Is that what it's called? So you go back to the host country and everything's changed so much, or it's just different because you're not with your parents. Anyway.
And you don't have the privilege of.
No, it's very
because for a lot of people who go to countries, they live like above the people that they're.
Yes.
Because like, whatever. Because if you go, say, you're a CEO of a company and you're sent to, Africa or Kenya or somewhere like Malay, somewhere Asian, like you're living with maids and your kids are accessing the best schools and you're living in a good neighborhood. But when you go back as a single woman, like she said, I'm coming back. And her friends were all like, okay, we'll help you and everything. And then she realized, like with her visa, she couldn't really get a job.
Okay.
And then she didn't have money. Like she couldn't really afford to live in a neighborhood that was safe. Like it was just all these things.
So she ended up having to leave.
She came back home realizing that she couldn't be there.
So there is this feeling like you don't have a place to call home. You do feel a little lost and torn.
Like
sorry, what were the
you said
5?
3 to 5. I just said the traits of third culture kids.
Yeah. Some of the positives are that you have a deeper understanding of human nature and human behavior, because not only when you have a second language, but you have an embedded second culture, you've adopted a lot of the different viewpoints and ways of thinking. I happen to be both in the Western hemisphere, so I didn't adopt any of the Asian way of thinking, but the Latin American way of thinking. And every country in Latin America is different.
Well,
on
those
its
are
own.
like they say, like, cross-cultural skills.
Yeah, so you have a lot of cross-cultural skills. You learn to negotiate between.
The other one they said, I know that I should be letting you, but the other one that I said that I thought that was interesting was observational skills.
Yes.
Because you're able to kind of observe a situation and figure out how to fit yourself into it.
Yeah.
Because you have to do that all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously the linguistic skills.
And then the linguistic skills is very important. Yeah. And then diplomacy is also, you learn even between two people from the same culture who are friction, you learn to read what both parties are missing from each other's communication and helping them figure things out.
And I mean, of course, there's the cross-cultural confusion, right? That is back and forth. Like the story, of the stories.
That doesn't always last for a long time. It can last.
One of the stories in the book was like whatever culture this young woman was in, like you didn't flush the toilet if it was just pee.
Oh, okay.
And so
it was too expensive to pay for
whatever.
the water.
And so then she came back, and then her grandmother was like, "Why did you leave?" Like, So it's just kind of like that kind of.
So I grew up with only showers, no bathtubs. Came to Canada the first summer. My parents were going to some church and I went along and we stayed with some people. So they didn't have a shower. They just had a bathtub. So I filled the bathtub, soaped up, got all in, drained it, filled the bathtub again to rinse off because I didn't like the soap on my skin.
Yeah.
And then the lady asked me when I came, "Do you always fill the bathtub twice?" And I said, "You mean the rest of you just get out with soap on your skin and feel all slimy and have soap? Like, don't you get rashes and irritation?"
But yeah, so those kinds of things, right? But anyway, I just lost my questions. Here they are. Do you think that globalization has changed the connection of third culture kids to their original or birth culture? Like, do you think it would be different now?
Well, the internet changed everything, because when I first got back, I wrote my friends letters, and I had about 12 really close Colombian friends. So I kind of would write one letter a day, but Colombians, it ends up, aren't letter writing culture. Like they just don't. Particularly my generation wasn't by then.
Right.
So I got very few letters back. So I kind of was upset and more depressed and angry. So I just quit. And then I would try maybe once a year, and I kind of lost touch. But then as soon as Facebook came into being, I just typed in names and found a few, and then they were all connected and totally have reconnected with everybody again. I mean, we don't chat every week, but that aspect of globalization has made, so now...
Like you would be able to,
now
I think
it would
people,
be very, very different.
Like you just think of like FaceTime, and especially like since COVID, right?
Right.
Like FaceTiming grandma and having
Yes.
this grandma can sit and read you a story. Like if you were a little kid.
Yeah, so my brothers left home before.
Like you didn't know your grandparents.
No, I did not.
Whereas-
I did not. I got letters. I didn't even get birthday presents or cards from them. I got included in the in the letters that were sent to my parents as a greeting to Charles. You know, so.
But I'm
whatever.
just saying, like,
No, and I didn't know my cousins or
No.
my aunts and uncles, but the culture here, because of the ethnic Mennonite group and the era, the 70s and 80s, they were all close with each other, the
Right.
cousins and brothers.
so
and
when you,
sisters.
and I mean, I guess,
So I when I came here for a summer visit, I had all these cousins and everybody, but I thought it was kind of a great experience. It was like a 1 month visit of all these cousins and picnics, and it was great. And then I would leave.
right. But then when we got like married and, you know, we're trying to not really infiltrate, but
Well,
that's how I felt
yes,
in
I
some
know.
ways. They weren't interested at all.
No, I
They
was
had
the weird.
their-
I was the weird cousin that had dropped in for a 1 month
Like
visit.
they-
They didn't even remember me or know me.
No. Whereas you did. And I think
And I
that-
remembered like details of my 1 month visit with my cousins, and this is what we had done. And so then I would tell them
But if
5
you
years
had
later,
been-
do you remember when we did this? And no,
But if you had like internet or and all this
Then,
kind
yeah,
of stuff,
that would have
you
been-
could have had a cousin that you talked to
all the time.
on a regular basis that you would have had. And I think there is a big difference between, and I sort of said this in the post that I did today about third culture kids and immigrants, because immigrants,
That was-
we
yeah.
make allowances for people who are immigrants. But if you come from a, you know, and
Well, I moved back home, and so I had the same last name, spoke English without an accent. But why was I so freakishly weird? Because people that my cousins could say, oh, he's the weird one from Colombia. It's just because he grew up there, and roll their eyes. But everybody else that I would meet, they didn't know. They thought why I was so weird.
Right.
Do we have time for me to tell one more story?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, it'll be a slightly longer episode this time.
That's okay. That's fine.
First year of university, German class, walked in, sat next to a guy, said hi, and we shook hands. And next class, I guess, came to class. I reached out to shake his hand, and he shook my hand, but he kind of stepped back and looked at me a little weird. And the next class, I said, hi, shook his hands, and he kind of like, why do you want to shake my hand every class? And I said, well, why not? Like, I totally did not catch on. Well, my parents did say, don't kiss any young women on both cheeks, because that's what you did there.
Right.
Like, if you were introduced to somebody the first time, you might never say goodbye with a kiss, but you might actually the first time. You would never say hello with a kiss.
Right. But
By the time you had a conversation, like if you went out with two friends and a young woman came along and you were all having a coffee, whatever, and then you left, you might actually give her a
Well, I
kiss.
feel like Roger and Lalande, right? Like our friends from Brazil.
Yeah.
Like once we had established, like
Then
when
it's
the
totally
first
fine.
time, like when we went and dropped off food
Yeah.
and whatever, then it was like yes, then they
Then the
want
hugs and the kiss, yeah.
right. Although it was all COVID,
so
but I mean, I'm just saying
But the instinct is
the
all there.
instinct was all there.
Yeah,
I thought,
but I had
felt.
been told by my dad, don't kiss girls on the cheek. It's not appropriate. But he had never said, don't shake guys' hands every time. Like in Colombia, the guys are not touchy, but there is a shake hand or a hand on the shoulder or a pounding on the back. There's some touch
Right.
when you say hello or goodbye very comfortably.
Yeah.
And Canadian men, no.
Okay.
Well, not if you're just meeting each other.
Right.
And it's usually just sports teams. Then you're allowed to kind of whatever. So, yeah. So I said, well, why not? And he said, well, it's a little too affectionate for me. And I said, whoa. I said, don't go down that path. That's not what I'm interested. And he said, okay. But anyway, so then months later, we had gotten to know each other, and he knew then I was from Colombia, and he actually was from Liechtenstein, or had been several years in Liechtenstein. So he was a little bit more savvy about two cultures. So then he said, like months later, now I know why you shook my hand.
That's funny.
But I mean, that was funny, but I don't remember all the incidents, but there was a lot of really uncomfortable times where I would just like, oh, now kids would say, oh, I had social anxiety, but then it was
literally the
not fitting in, not reading the signals, not understanding the culture at all.
I was talking about anecdotes, which you've shared already, but I guess we chose obviously not to take our kids to a different culture. Like, that's obviously, but if somebody said to you, like, I'm thinking of moving to a third culture with my kids, or, to
I give them
that.
the book.
Yeah, that for sure. Would you?
I would say, these are the things you need to prepare for. And this is what you need to know your child really well. My parents were from a different generation, right? They didn't.
No, well, they
were very career. They were very career.
Your dad had a calling.
Yeah.
And so the rest of you were supposed to just feel blessed.
Yeah.
Like, and God would provide and God would take care of all these things.
And I mean, minus the negative things that I went through, I still feel.
Well, it's made you the person.
For me, it's not even looking for a silver lining. There's so many positives from it that much outweighed any negatives.
I guess for me, I think, but our lives
for some acquaintances and some friends and brothers, it wasn't the same. It wasn't so positive.
Well, and I also think, like, I've seen other people who have, like, done that, right?
Yeah.
And now they just don't seem to, like, they actually come back and they actually really, really struggle with.
Like the children do.
The children do.
And even the adults.
And the adults.
Well, but everybody who lives in another culture comes back and has re-entry shock.
Right.
But now most companies and organizations have training for what re-entry shock is going to be like, and they coach you through it.
Right. And I also think, like, you have to be very careful about your, like, they actually get into the book all about, like, how you make the decision, and you actually have to consider your financial planning and what that's, and some people who can afford it actually always can keep a home here.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. And then the other time is the age. Like, I had friends that came to high school in Colombia. They were ripped away from their best grade 9 friends to do grade 10 and 11.
And they talk about,
and then they were like, they couldn't have a prom. They were missing everything. No hockey teams. Like, they were a mess because they came, like, if you're going to take your children, you have to go before grade 5.
Yeah.
After grade 5, unless you have a particular personality of child that would really enjoy traveling.
And
the thing is, if you've also done a lot of traveling for holidays and trips, and kids are used to different cultures and smells and sights.
I also think you also have to prepare, like, some people go from privilege to privilege.
Yes.
But some people don't really, like, they're here and then they go to this other country and they're living on a compound with swimming pools and access to clubs and all this sorts of things, and then it's like you come back here and you're like, well, wait a minute, I live in a house on a street with a
at the time, it's changed since then. At the time, Colombia was very much a economic, social class structured society. So my parents lived at a middle class level. So my Colombian friend's parents were engineers, architects, lawyers, owners of companies, entrepreneurs.
Which you wouldn't have been socializing with those kind of people if you had lived in Canada.
No, not at all. Like, I had
teachers.
I had piano. Like, my dad was a nurse and my mom was a teacher, so it would have been a completely different kind of more, well, Canadian middle class is different than Colombian middle class. And I mean, I learned how to take public transit in Colombia and do once I was a teenager and do stuff like that. But when I came to Canada, I realized, people that are middle class don't really take the bus very much in the city. Like,
exactly.
We lived in Niagara region,
right.
so that's different. In Toronto, it's completely different. But in Niagara, people drove cars, and all my Canadian peers drove cars and didn't take the bus. And I'm like, I don't want to take the bus. Why do I? And I was like very snobby about that, even though I had grown up taking the bus. Well,
and when we moved on to
when we moved to our first house, it was on the side of town that was a little sketchy to me. And I was mortified that
this is what we can afford right now. And then eventually you would sell, like, this is called a starter home. And that's what people do. I had no concept of what starter home was. So because your parents never owned a home till they came back and were much older, right? So anyway, I think...
I grew up surrounded by poverty and seeing it and being kind and generous to poor people and joining my dad in projects that helped the poor.
And I was saying...
So when I first came here, though, I didn't understand the poor because, like, the poor in Colombia, if, doesn't matter how little money you have, you find a pail of water and you wash your face and your body and you wear deodorant and you do your hair, no matter how poor you are.
Right.
And here, the poor were basically the homeless people who for mental health reasons or whatever, and were dirty.
Well, and
then later on, I learned about other poor people in Canada that were welfare recipients, and then those children wouldn't bathe and.
Well, you were exposed to that when I was principal,
yeah, when you were principal.
And I mean,
I couldn't understand that aspect of
And I also said
here.
to you today when we were talking about like the transiency of some of the kids that I dealt with who were in like, by the time they got to me, they had been in like 8 different schools. And so they had some of all this other issues as well. So it's an interesting topic. I certainly would really recommend the book Third Culture Kids. And I just thought it was an interesting...
And I haven't driven you too crazy with my Colombian ways.
No.
Partially Colombian ways.
No, we eat lots of different...
the food-wise, it's good.
The food-wise is good.
No, I'm talking behaviors.
No behaviors. Hey,
growing up with a maid was not a good thing.
No, that was not a good thing. But I think that as Canadians, it's almost sad in a way that we aren't more... Like we call ourselves the cultural mosaic, right? Like that's all but I think that we are really... Like
in urban centers, I think urban Canadians are better at it, but small cities, no, not so much. I had an aunt, my dad's sister, who had worked in Panama and in Colombia, and she knew what I was going to go through, I think, because she saw it in other young kids that in other families that she had seen come to Canada. So she kind of prepared me. She said, like, this was like 2 months or so before I left Colombia. She said, you're going to need to find things about Colombia, culture, language, your friends' behaviors, how they think, what their philosophies are, their values. You need to hold on to the good ones. At times now you probably even think some negative things about Colombia and Colombians, but you can just drop the negatives and just hold on to the positives. When you get to Canada, you're going to see a lot of negatives and some positives. She goes, you never have to adopt the negative Canadian values and aspects. You can just shrug them aside and just adopt the positive ones.
Right. And learn.
That really was what I held on to for the first 2 years.
And I think really, the other book where you kind of are at the top of the pyramid, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you have choices to make, and you can slide down. You can slide down, or you can, because when you get to the 2 people start at the top of the pyramid, when they get to the bottom, depending on which way they go, they're very far apart.
Yeah.
And that's what I find about society now, that people are so far apart and in between is just rock, and they can't seem to get to each other. So anyway, good discussion. Try the book if you're interested in reading and understanding. I think it's good for those of us who haven't experienced it. I mean, there are a lot of things about the way I grew up that were challenging too.
I'd say you have a bit of third culture issues too.
But anyway, so on June 30th, we're going to talk about bikes and bike tripping. We're going to go on a little bike trip. We're just going to talk about bikes. I'm going to see if I can get Sebastian to come on and talk about bikes with us. So anyway, thanks for joining us for Growing Up as a Third Culture Kid.
Thanks for putting
by
up with
Charles
my long
Paw.
anecdotes.
And thanks for joining us here on No Room for Phonies.
Good night.